Dear Agni Yogis, today we turn to one of the most beautiful and most important topics. Living in the ashram of the teacher is the synthesis of the practice of Agni Yoga. A pure, holy, spiritual life in the midst of the storms and adversities of everyday worldly existence. We continue on the path we began with the videos How do you find your teacher? Become a disciple, exercise the fiery condition, living in the continuous presence of the teacher, the path of the interior temple, and participation in the life of the higher world. We cannot repeat all this again. The mastery of this knowledge and of these practices must be taken for granted today. Whether you are or want to become a professional athlete, a concert pianist, or an astronaut, every vocation requires a particular way of life. Even for breeding pigs, there are required definite conditions of life. How then can a man who decides on achieving the heroic deed of a social life remain in the old Philistine dens? If you want to be a spiritual disciple, you have to give up the habitual way of life of the average man. The life of a disciple from the moment of his acceptance becomes entirely new. His dormant energies are awakened, and their development and transmutation are accelerated. The tension of the disciple is great. He must follow a certain regime without abandoning his regular duties. We wait for those who strive to abandon the old life. What is the best way of life for a disciple? The ashram of his teacher. For him there is nothing greater and more beautiful than to live at the feet of a wise master. The monastery is an archetype of humanity. For thousands of years, in both East and West, it has been a place of spiritual perfection. Here people practiced living according to the precepts of their higher nature. In former times, here lived those who were not content with making just beautiful words, but strived to seriously start the realization of a higher, purer life. We are talking about the way of life of the Egyptian and Greek mysteries, of the schools of Pythagoras, Confucius, and Buddha, the Academy of Plato, the Eastern and Western monastic orders in their heyday, and of the ashrams of Milarepa, B.D. Griffith, and Gandhi. In all countries, at all times, and in all cultures, monasteries were centers of spirituality, bulwarks of the spirit against materialism, and sources of wisdom and spiritual guidance for entire peoples. We owe Western culture, as we know it today, to the civilizing work of the Christian monks. In the Middle Ages, monasteries were places of making land arable, of scholarship, cultivation of the arts, education of the young, and selfless service to the sick and the weak. Abbots often exercised political functions in the government. The preservation of the writings of the ancient Greek and Roman authors through the turmoil of the migration period is above all the work of the monks. In the midst of the bloody chaos of the fall of the Roman Empire, monasteries were oases for the preservation of civilization and germ cells of the new Christian culture. Isn't monastery an outdated term? Yes, of course. Most monasteries are degenerated. We are absolutely opposed to monasteries, as they are the antithesis of life, only seed beds of life, communities displaying the best manifestations of labor will find our assistance. What we have in mind, what they once were, and what they can become again in a new contemporary form is holy places. What is such a sanctuary? A place where a community of spiritually elevated people is in connection with the higher world, serves the common good with selfless work, and rises to greater perfection through spiritual exercises. Who does not long for the peace and solemnity of a holy place? We are looking with awe at the holy lives of the founders of religious orders and monasteries, the ancient monastic fathers and mothers, whether their names are Anthony, Pachomius, Basil, Benedict, Francis of Assisi or Sergius of Radonesh, Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila or Catherine of Siena. At least when you were a child, you too dreamed of imitating such heroes and saints. How can we, today, in our Western culture, under modern conditions, follow these venerable role models and rise again to such heights? The path of earlier epochs, the retreat into the desert, to a hermitage or a cave in the Himalayas, is no longer viable. Above all things, put away from you the false idea that such training is to be had by seeking it amidst the mountains of the Himalaya or the temples of ancient Hind or Egypt, the religious monasteries, or the countless self-announced teachers of other lands than your own. If you believe in the laws of cause and effect, you should be able to see that you have been placed in your present environment to work out some much needed change in your own character and surroundings, When that change has been made, and it has become necessary for you to seek other racial opportunities, the law will place you there. But if you run away from present duties and necessities, you will gain nothing, and only have to return to and remain in the environment you have deserted. When you are ready for a change in the right direction, if your heart is fixed on necessary training for such a field as I have suggested, the way will open for it. It does not meet the requirements of our time to isolate oneself from the earthly conditions and to withdraw behind monastery walls. Not hiding from life, but transforming it is required. The kingdom of Christ will not be won by the disciple who betakes himself to some quiet corner for the express purpose of getting out of the strife and turmoil of the world. If it were so, evolutionary law would have placed that disciple in another world, upon some other planet in space. The omnipresent need downright cries out for relief. The spiritual man cannot close his ears to this call. We serve humanity. We love humanity. Many activists remain in the earthly spheres so that they can continue working amidst all calamities. We certainly do not approve of those fanatics who abandon their earthly obligations and bring nothing but confusion to all around them. They talk about higher harmonies, but at the same time forget that there must be harmony between the earthly world and the supermundane. These fanatics consider earthly tasks to be beneath their dignity, and thus prove their ignorance. They came to earth to fulfill some task, and should honor their obligation and love their task. With proper devotion to their earthly work, they would be able to sense the supermundane touches. This kind of devotion is a natural link between the worlds. I, for one, certainly don't want to give up my partner, children, job, and participation in earthly development. You are right, for in doing so, you would deprive yourself of the best opportunity to learn and to perfect yourself. Everyday life is a touchstone for your progress that nothing can replace. Only here can you train, test, and confirm your spiritual achievements. Only here can you find out with certainty which spiritual level you have actually attained. So, the great challenge of today's time is on the one hand, to work in the midst of the world, and on the other hand, to lead a pure spiritual life. Is that even possible? Yes, these two requirements are combined in the way of life of the inner monastery, which we had already discussed in detail in the video The Path of the Interior Temple. Let the inner life of each one of you be his own sanctuary. This is a realization of the ancient ideal, which is appropriate for the present time. Let us collect the most beautiful, heroic ideas of all times and countries, and with creative imagination, let us apply their achievements in our life, taking into consideration the peculiarities of our epoch. Only such imitation will give the correct foundation for further progress. Thereby, you combine the contemplative life of a saint with the struggle in the world for the triumph of the Spirit. This will be a much greater achievement than leading a spiritual existence secluded in a monastic cell. People should not think that they must retreat to the life of a hermit in order to properly develop their consciousness. Amidst daily life on earth can be found beautiful striving, and such a heroic deed will be even more wonderful. Thus, the promise becomes true that you can live in heaven, whatever your external life situation may be. Man should strive with all his power toward the supermundane world. By doing this, he will develop a conscious awareness that he participates continuously in the supermundane world. At the same time, he must treasure his earthly life, must learn to rejoice at high quality in his labor, and must continue with the earthly life as he finds new ways of perfectment in it. One might ask how it is possible to reconcile these seemingly contradictory ways. Truly, it can be done, for man can perfect his consciousness. Those who embrace these opposites are especially useful for the perfectment of the world. They strengthen their magnetism and thus naturally attract the hearts of disciples. The monk is an archetype of humanity. The monastic dimension is a necessary part of the fullness of our existence. Within each one of us, there is hidden, among many other things, a monk. Everyone feels within himself the longing for a higher, purer life. Up to today, the saints, heroes of faith, and spiritual leaders of all religions of all times, from Buddha, Pythagoras, and Plato, to Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa, have led a monastic life. There is no higher profession than the monastic one. May God grant that we may one day put on the simple monk's robe, for which my soul is longing. The mere thought of it gives me great joy, but by our own strength alone, without being called upon by God, we cannot accomplish this. Why does Gogol call monasticism the highest rank in society? Because its members tread the only promising path to the salvation of the world. the road to self-sanctification. It has always been the way of the monks not to use big words, but to offer in silence the highest commitment, and to bear witness to the right path with the example of their own lives. This was and is at all times the highest path. Intellectuals experiment with ideas. Monks experiment with their lives. And if Alyosha took the path of monastic life, it was only because at that time this path alone impressed him and seemed to guarantee him, as it were, the ideal way out for his soul, which was urging out of the darkness of worldly depravity into the light of love. Our time downright cries out for monastic achievements. What we need most urgently is revival of spirituality, turning to the higher eternal self, obedience to God's word, or to put it differently, to the cosmic order, elevation above the affairs of this world, spiritual guidance by wise teachers, and community. But I, for one, would not like to bear the name monk. No, of course not. This term is outdated. Today we better say spiritual warrior, hero of faith, Agni Yogi, or spiritual disciple, in order to point to the possibility of a radical alternative to the conventional bourgeois existence, and to the seriousness and rigor of following the great masters, which is so alien to our time. The life of the man of the future is shaped by discipline, contemplation, living in two worlds, self-improvement and selfless service. It thus corresponds very largely to the monkish ideal. Alyosha Karamazov is an eternal monument of such a person, who appears as a saint in the midst of the most repugnant circumstances. Monks are not special beings. They are just what all people on earth should be like.